Alright, so to use the autopilot in the TBM, and it's also this autopilot, this style autopilot exists in a few other aircraft too, and then even the ones that it doesn't exist in, the buttons and things are named a similar thing also, so you'll start to make sense of it in other aircraft as well. I picked Ithaca Tompkins Regional Airport just because I know there's no mountains or anything around it, and it's going to be easiest to learn to autopilot in an area where you don't really have to worry about avoiding mountains. You can just learn it, not have to dodge stuff. So we're sitting on the runway ready to go, and let's take a look at this primary display first. This blue thing, I guess it's blue, whatever color that is, that is the heading bug. So that's where the autopilot is going to try to steer to if you have heading mode engaged, right? If you're telling the autopilot to also handle heading through the heading bug, it'll go there. I'm going to ignore the magenta and the green VOR and GPS stuff right now. Let's just use the bugs for the moment. They're pretty useful. So that's a heading bug, and you move it around to tell it where you want to go. The heading is also displayed over here in the degrees. So how do we move that around? Well, up here at the top is your autopilot controls for this aircraft and a few others, right? And here's the heading knob. So turning that knob changes where the heading bug is. So as you can see, it does that. But also, what I like to do when I'm going to fly a pattern, let's say, let's fly a pattern to get used to the autopilot. I'll sitting on the runway before takeoff, I'll push it in. I'll just click it, right? And that sets the heading to the current heading. So at any time you can push that and it'll set the autopilot heading to the current heading. So we've just snapped the bug to 325 degrees, right? Now, if I want to decide what all of my legs are going to be, right? So runway heading is 325, right? Let's start with 325 minus 90. So minus 90 will be our crosswind leg. It's going to be 235, right? Minus 90 again is going to be our downwind leg. It'll be 145. Minus 90 again is going to be our base leg. And then obviously our final is going to be the same as the runway, which is 325. So this is going to be where we're going to go. And I also tend to mark down what my altitude is, right? So looks like I'm going to call it 1100. All right, so let's have an idea of what my altitude is. So I'll put this over on my other screen, right? I'll just put it down somewhere where we can see it, right? So back over here, so we started our bug on our runway heading. We're at 1,100 feet. For the TBM, I mean, let's just fly 2,500 or 3,000 feet over above the ground, right? So we want to be at, like, let's say 3,000 feet roughly, right? Here is see that same saddle type thing, that's the altitude bug. And then here in this area we'll eventually have a vertical speed bug, which will be our target for our vertical speed. So right now let's get our altitude bug set. So let's get back up here, and we should do a little setup here, right? We do want the flight director to be on. We'll engage autopilot once we get wheels up, once we get off the runway. So we know we're going to want heading select, so let's turn on heading select. We're not doing an approach right now. This is approach mode. That's for Like if you're using ILS landing or something, you can use approach mode, but we're doing heading mode. This is nav mode. This would be how you would select it to do like your magenta line or your VORs or something, but we're not using that right now. We're just going to use the heading bug. So flight director on, heading select on. Let's tell it we want to select an altitude. And as I said over here, this will be our altitude bug. And this is again our altitude knob. So let's turn that up. We said 3000 sounds pretty good. So let's set that to 3000. So we had to set altitude hold mode first, and then we could set the altitude. Now let's set some kind of way to do the vertical speed. The easiest to understand, I guess, is turning vertical speed mode on at this point. And you see how this little saddle appears? This little saddle is going to be a vertical speed bug. So we can adjust it with this knob over here. So, you know, we could roll that up to, let's say for the TBM, I mean the TBM can climb at like 1600. It seems at typically, and I think it can do that. If you're up in the mountains, it might not be able to do that, but that seems reasonable for this aircraft. But another way to do it, so this will just make the aircraft, it'll pitch the aircraft to achieve that vertical speed. And it's the same with descent too, right? Like if you're lowering your altitude, you want to descend, then you can set your vertical speed down. So you'll click the altitude mode first and pick your altitude on your altitude bug, and then you'll pick like vertical speed, let's say, and then pick what vertical speed. And it always resets the vertical speed back to 0 there. So you'll pick your altitude. It doesn't go to it yet. Like let's say you're up in the air, right? You pick a different altitude. It doesn't start going to it. Then you have to pick either vertical speed or flight level control, and then select. But it's going to stay neutral flight, and then you've got to pick a vertical speed or an airspeed. So vertical speed is going to pitch the aircraft to achieve that vertical speed. Your airspeed won't be under control. So if you pitch this up too high, you can stall the aircraft. If you pitch it down too low, you're going to overspeed the aircraft, right? So you might have to work the throttle, flaps, whatever, to achieve, avoid destroying the aircraft. But the other way to do it, which I kind of prefer on takeoff, I like vertical speed mode when I'm in the air, trying to just go up and down to different altitudes. But when I'm on takeoff, I like flight level control mode. So this mode, this will adjust the pitch to achieve an airspeed. I think the tower is talking to us. But so this will do is this will let us pick an airspeed that will, and you can see it, I gave us a bug up here over on the airspeed indicator. So now we've got a bug there. We can pick the airspeed that we want to target at. So if we want to climb out, I'd say on this aircraft, 125 knots is actually a pretty nice climb out, right? It's not crazy. And this is safer because if you're in a different density altitude where you maybe can't climb as fast, this will allow it to not stall, right? It's going to maintain 125 knots. So if we're under max performance throttle, we've adjusted our throttle to max performance, and we set this at 125, it's going to try to hit this target altitude, but it's going to try to hold 125 knots, which we know won't be a stall. So if it can't climb as much in these conditions, it just won't be pitched up as much, right? And it's going to take us longer to get to our target altitude. And you can also use this on descent too, right? So you can use that to also try to help from overspeeding. You just might not descend if you can't pitch down without overspeeding. So I'm going to set it at, we're going to target 125 knots. We're going to try to get up to 3,000 feet. And we're going to start off at this heading. We have a list of the other headings for our other legs, and we've got a reminder of what our airport altitude is. So that looks pretty good at this point. So now that we've got this done, all we got to do is hit this engage autopilot once we get in the air. Now in this aircraft, there's also a yaw damper, And I see people in real life engaging the yaw damper at pretty low altitude. Yaw damper just, there's a tendency of this aircraft to wag its tail when under autopilot, and the yaw damper calms it down so you don't make your passengers sick. There's some debate about what altitude you're supposed to be at when you engage the yaw damper. I mean, it doesn't hurt to engage it on the sim anyway, because there's no danger, real danger. So just another thing to make note of is on this aircraft, our landing lights are up here. So if we want to turn our landing lights off when we get in the air, we'll have to go there. A shortcut for this AP button is just the plain letter Z on the keyboard. So that's what I'm going to use, is the letter Z. So let's put this thing up in the air and see what happens. So we're going to take off as normal. When we get up off the ground, I'll engage the autopilot. I'll click the letter Z. And we've got one level of flaps right now. So I'll pull up the flaps in a little bit here. So let's go ahead and take off. We're supposed to, so I like to be zoomed up like this on takeoff. We're supposed to keep an eye on the temperature and the torque pretty carefully on takeoff here in order to set our max performance takeoff in whatever these conditions are. So I'm going to hold the brake and start slowly bringing it up, because you can't just go full throttle. I mean, in the sim I think you can. I don't think it'll actually be smart enough to blow the motor, but let's just kind of slowly bring it up so we don't exceed that. We have to start rolling if our ITT starts getting up there, because the aircraft moving will cool it. See how it started to cool. So now we can go a little bit more, kind of slowly creeping it up. We don't want to over torque it. And rotate it around 90 or so. So now we're up, landing gear up, and I'm going to hit the letter Z now. And it wants us to turn the yaw damper on. I'm going to turn off the inertial separator also. We don't do that. And I'll turn on the yaw damper. That should clear all our warnings. So as you can see, it's maintaining 125. What I'm going to do in the air here, because this aircraft is so fast, and I'm trying to pop this out, and I'm going to put it on the second monitor. Whoops. Oh, we have to watch out for the ITT. This one will go over torque as it climbs. We have to watch that. The real aircraft, I think the torque goes down as it climbs, but in the sim, for some reason, it goes the other way. So I've put show it here. I've put the map in the other screen, and we've got our headings here too. So now that we've done that a little bit, and one thing we want to do also is we do want to have our nav over there too, because we want the stopwatch, right? I'll just put the stopwatch on the screen for today. I'd really like to make it smaller, but it doesn't want to.
Charlie, Charlie, 2020, you are leaving my airspace.
I only want the stopwatch, right? So I want to start my crosswind leg, and my crosswind leg heading is going to be 235. So 235, somewhere down here, right? 90 degrees. So we're going to move our heading until we're at 235. And now I'm going to start the stopwatch. So this is going to tell us how far away from the airport that way we're going to go. How would your frequency change so that they go away?
Ithaca Tower, Charlie, 2020, frequency change.
So we're going to know how far we fly away from where the airport is in this direction. so that we know how far we have to fly back. So let's just say we go with about, I don't know, about a minute, just to keep the video shorter. So we'll go for about a minute this way, and then we'll adjust the heading for our downwind leg. This thing hauls, right? Like we're going to 16 miles per hour knots. So our downwind leg is going to be 145, right? So now we're about a minute in. We're going to adjust our heading to 145. And see how we got to 3,000 feet, and it automatically switched to altitude hold mode from flight level control. It automatically, when it got near the altitude, it automatically switched modes. So that was pretty great. So, and I'm going to reset this counter and start it again now that we're doing this leg. As you can see, that does not like going between the different resolutions of monitors, right? That's the airport we're looking at. I forgot to time how far we flew that way, so I'm going to time from when we're about across from it.
Delta cleared to land runway 32. 1283 at 8.
I mean, I think we probably flew almost, maybe a little over a minute away. But I'm actually going to reset the stopwatch when a line from these two wingtips going straight across is about across from the airport. And that's going to tell us how long of an approach we're going to have, so that we have an easier time in this really fast aircraft hitting the airport on the pattern there. That 1 minute timer when we turn for our base leg is going to tell us when to turn for our final. And then the timer that I'm about to reset here, I'm about to start when we're crossing the airport, that'll tell us how long our final approach is going to be, so we have an idea of when to, how quickly to get this aircraft on the ground. This thing flies pretty fast. And I'll go a little bit late rather than a little bit early, because I don't want the airport sneaking up on me. So I'm going to start it. Alright, it just misses it. So we'll start it roughly now. So give us an idea when to do that. So just a sanity check. There's the airport we were going to right there. Now you can make all these legs longer and fly out like 10 or 15 minutes around or whatever, but that's pretty quick. So while we're up here, if we want to change our altitude, let's say we want to climb up to 4,000. We're already in altitude hold mode. I can adjust this up, the altitude bug up to 4,000, let's say. And notice how we didn't start climbing. Because we can set the bug and it doesn't do anything yet. I can set vertical speed mode now, and notice how the vertical speed bug is at 0, so it still didn't like throw us wildly out of control. So now as I move this dial, it'll climb at that rate. So if I select like 1,000 feet per minute, it's going to climb at 1,000 feet per minute, which should mean it takes about a minute to get from 3,000 feet to 4,000 feet, right? So I guess we'll see. And notice that it's going to switch. When we get close to 4,000, you're going to see this light switch over to altitude select, altitude hold, because it's going to automatically know to do that as we get close to that altitude. We should. Lower our torque a little bit because we're climbing and the sim runs backwards. Our jet engine is making more power at a higher altitude for some reason. And you see it switched now. It switched to altitude hold mode. because it's within whatever. All right, so we're about 2 minutes past the airport now. So let's go ahead and go to our base leg, which is at 55 degrees is our target. So let's do a heading bug over to 55 degrees. There's a bug with the bugs. It would be really nice to use the keyboard shortcuts to be able to adjust the heading bug, because then when you're just flying in this mode, you can move your bug around with the keyboard. But if you do that much, this bug is going to start going around and you lose all mouse keyboard control to the aircraft. You can't close some of the computers. It's terrible. So now we want to reset and start. We got a minute, probably a little less than a minute, because I should have reset that when we about started the turn to be consistent with how I did it when we turned to the crosswind. So in a little less than a minute, we will go back to our base leg, which will be 55, which is 325 degrees.
Generic 0 Romeo Delta, turn next taxiway.
And then we'll know that we'll have about 2 minutes from there to the airport. We're up at 4,000 feet, so that's fine. And we could also decide to go down a little now, right? We could go down, let's go down to 3,500, and then let's go vertical speed mode again, and move our heading bug down, and let's descend at 500, 800 feet per minute, and pull back the throttle a bit, right? So
Generic
avoid
0 Romeo
overspeeding.
Delta, turn next taxiway. Generic 0 Romeo Delta,
Oh, we need to start our turn.
121.8.
325. We overshot a little bit. We didn't set up an iOS approach for Ithaca, so we'll have to hand fly it in.
Generic 0 Romeo Delta.
So I'm going to reset and start, and we should be about 2 minutes away. There's the airport there. We looked at the map. We did overshoot, so we can fix this, right? Let's set our heading bug too far, right? Let's set our heading bug too far now while we're still pretty far out, and let's start reducing our speed and our altitude. Let's go down to like 2,900. Set our vertical speed down to, so let's lose 500 feet per minute, 600 feet per minute. That's our bug setting. And now let's set our heading. Just kind of ease her back to the right heading here. So I'm just kind of moving the bug around. So this is how I'll fly this aircraft typically. I'll rarely ever hand fly the TBM. I'll fly it just by, if I'm not setting like an actual nav course, I'll just move the bugs around, the altitude and the heading bugs. Much easier on this aircraft to do it this way. It doesn't turn sharp. It's kind of a lazy autopilot. So especially when it's going to level out short. I see how short of the heading bug it kind of levels out. So kind of keep that in mind. So I think we're good with the map here. Well, I'll put it over on the other screen in case I need it again. But there's the airport. I'm going to say we're close enough to it. Hit the Z. I'll turn it off autopilot. It's going to be mad. It's really mad about that. The autopilot's not on. Okay, turn off the yaw damper. That'll make it happy. So we got to get down into flap speed.
Landing gear. Landing
Give her
gear.
some landing gear. Balloons quite a bit. But this aircraft has got a ton of flap to it. So I try to approach between 85 and 100. Give it another notch of flaps. I think we're at full 34 degrees of flaps right now, so let's just crash this thing into Ithaca Airport. I think 90 is pretty nice with this aircraft. I don't know what the POH manual says for it, but I think 90 is a pretty good approach for this particular aircraft. We're just kind of guessing here. I'm going to just active pause here for a second because I don't have this set up the way I want it. PFD map settings. Oh, I don't get to do it there. So if we want to set the wind, I like to have option 3 set. You've got these other, like a lot of these buttons don't actually work on the TBM. It's actually set using this. So this is the PFD, that's the MFD. So unpause it. We got a wind coming from the left at 5 knots. So now all these settings, like the altitude bug is still set and the heading bug is still set. So if we wanted to do a touch and go, we can actually, on our descent here, we can set heading select on. We can set like our altitude that we want. We can set flight level control to 125. Roughly. We don't crash the aircraft because we're messing with it. And what we can do now is, if we were doing a touch and go, which I don't think I'm going to, because I think I'm going to land too late. And I think this runway's too short for landing that late. You could raise your flaps, throttle up, and then hit the letter Z again, and resume the autopilot and go around again. So, also if we abort the takeoff, or abort the landing, and we're going to go around, we've already got our autopilot set for a decent climb out and a heading, right? Yeah, we're going to land way too late to touch and go, but I am terrible at landing, so this aircraft isn't too bad to land though. Bounced it. And then we can want to be fancy. The over RPM is the prop. But yeah. So that's how I use that particular. I also found if you pop out windows and put them on other screens to avoid the problem you had with your weather, before you close the flight, bring the window back into the main screen, and then put the window back in the flight simulator and then close it. Otherwise, you might lose your window forever. But, alright, that's that then.